Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I made waves several months ago when I seemingly was the only man on the internet who despised The Last of Us adaptation from HBO. Since the show has resolved its finale several weeks ago, the general discourse surrounding The Last of Us has gradually changed into a much more nuanced argument than the incessant screeching of Stan saying it's the greatest thing ever to be created for television in the history of forever. Now that there's a nuanced discussion, I'm happy about that. It's not necessarily people coming over to agree with me, but there's a lot more reasonable, objective opinions coming out that I greatly appreciate. But the videos that I did that were definitely the most divisive amongst those in the comments were the ones surrounding my opinions on the viewership for The Last of Us. Initially, I came out and said the viewership for The Last of Us, the initial premiere episode at 4 million roughly viewership, was bad. Not terrible, but far below expectations for a show of that caliber in a franchise on that scale. But later, I had to confess that 10 million views in the first couple days consolidated were impressive, were very, very impressive. That jump is nothing to be scoffed at in the least. But as the series progressed, the numbers seemed to get a little bit more clouded and not as reasonable. They very, very much exceeded the realms of possibility or logical reasoning. I definitely called into question a lot of the numbers that HBO themselves were putting out about House of the Dragon compared to Last of Us. They were saying The Last of Us was doing better than House of the Dragon, and those articles from the mainstream and access media came out in support of that, even though the numbers that they provided in their articles themselves contradicted that statement. Now we have the Nielsen data for the penultimate episode of The Last of Us, which finally came out after over a month. Those viewership numbers take far too long to come out, but now that we have those numbers, we can do a little bit of comparison and see that it's not as clear cut as they are saying. I still don't think that HBO is necessarily lying or anything like that. I just call into question and generally don't trust any big corporation, especially when it's their self-reported numbers saying that they're amazing and whatnot. We have to use the numbers provided towards us. And disclaimer real fast, the Nielsens, of course, are not the complete numbers for The Last of Us, mainly because HBO and HBO Max, the streaming version versus the cable version, are two separate numbers, and the Nielsen only takes into account the HBO Max side of things. So I will only be comparing The Last of Us numbers on Nielsen to the House of the Dragon numbers on the Nielsens, because you can only compare the same set of numbers to the same set of numbers within a certain data collection method. For example, comparing the Nielsens to Samba TV doesn't make any sense, but Samba TV to Samba TV, that is totally within the realms of logistic and reasonable debate and reasonable breakdowns. But we have the numbers here from Nielsen's. But before we get into that, I want to jump into this article from Variety, which is saying that The Last of Us Season 1 finale crosses 1.2 million viewers, reaching series high despite Oscars competition. Yes, it came out the same night as the Oscars. No one cares about that whatsoever. But 8.2 million, that's an important number because that is roughly double with the initial overnight premiere numbers. These are just overnight, of course, overnight premiere numbers of that initial first episode. Whereas the House of the Dragon, it was getting overnight numbers in well the 9 to 10 millions over the course of its first season. But somehow Last of Us is viewed more than House of the Dragon, even though it was viewed overnight substantially less. And that's where a lot of my confusion comes in. I'm not making any firm statements in this video. I'm just saying The Last of Us numbers don't make any sense because the overnight viewership for The Last of Us are substantially lower than the reported overnight numbers for House of the Dragon. Yet Access mainstream media and even HBO themselves are saying that the viewership for The Last of Us far outpaces that of House of the Dragon. It doesn't make any sense. And in this Variety article, they come out and say, beginning with 4.7 million and ending with 8.2, viewership of The Last of Us soared by 75% throughout season 1. And I have to say, that is an impressive increase in viewership. I cannot deny that The Last of Us is an abject success. Whether or not I think it's poorly written, those numbers are impressive, but those numbers are still below House of the Dragon, which they later follow up with. House of the Dragon was viewed by 9.99 million with episode 1, 10.2 million with episode 2, and 9.3 with its finale. Those overnight numbers are clearly higher for House of the Dragon, but articles are constantly saying in recent weeks that The Last of Us demolished House of the Dragon, but those overnight numbers conflict with that. Yes, there's a difference between overnight and consolidated, but it doesn't make sense to have such lower overnight numbers and then massive exploding consolidated numbers. There must be a reason, a logical reason for that increase if it is in fact true. Again, I call into question the numbers that HBO themselves have put out because these are HBO numbers here. But we have the Nielsen numbers for the penultimate episode, the second to last episode of The Last of Us, and it's not great. And of course, these are viewership minutes versus viewers, so it's a little bit of a inconsistent, unclear translation method. That's why I'm only going to be comparing this number to House of the Dragon itself. HBO's The Last of Us got 1 billion minutes watched, 1 billion and 11 minutes watched, with this nothing to scoff at, not whatsoever, but it's not even the top thing in its penultimate episode. Outer Banks, I'd never heard of, and this Netflix murder show, I'd never heard of. Yes, the numbers are a little bit different when there's a Netflix show because they drop their whole things outright, but it's substantially higher for Outer Banks, something I've never heard of, over The Last of Us, which was heralded as the biggest viewed thing in HBO history. It was a big event in TV that everyone was watching. It was must-see television, yet it wasn't in first place. I call into question HBO's numbers because of Nielsen numbers like this, because of other evidence that I'm going to present in a moment. It doesn't make any sense. And IGN even talked about it. The Last of Us on HBO is far outpacing House of the Dragon viewership. I just showed you the overnight viewership that completely contradicts that statement in its entirety. But HBO came out and said, oh yeah, just Last of Us, it got like a 30 million average per episode, and House of the Dragon only got 29 average. How does that make any sense? Why are the consolidated for Last of Us more than 3 times its initial viewership, whereas the numbers for House of the Dragon aren't anywhere near that times multiplier? It doesn't make sense. And why are they throwing under the bus the incredible success of House of the Dragon? I do have to clarify, I didn't love House of the Dragon. I thought it was fine. Nothing to really write home about. It just existed, had some good episodes, had some really bad ones in my opinion. So this isn't me just wanting House of the Dragon to come out on top of this. It's me saying this doesn't make sense. These numbers do not align in a logical fashion. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And we have the Nielsens for House of the Dragon's 10th episode, so it's kind of difficult to say. I tried to find the penultimate episode viewership for House of the Dragon on the Nielsens. I wasn't able to, but we got the finale episode, which was 1 billion and 58 minutes watched. That is not far outpacing. The Last of Us numbers are not far outpacing. 1 billion and 11 minutes versus 1 billion and 58 minutes is a marginal enough difference, even if those numbers are true, which I seem to take them as because I don't really have any other choice at this time. But to say far outpacing is incredibly misleading. So even if I do accept all these numbers that I see before me, all the HBO numbers, all of that, it's a misrepresentation done by the access of mainstream media to make Last of Us seem like the greatest success in history. That is a marginal difference, if a difference at all, and House of the Dragon is ahead in that difference, at least for the finale versus the penultimate of The Last of Us. Again, that is what I'm going to be harping on in this video, is these numbers don't make sense when compared to the headlines and the massive praise labeled for this show by both HBO and access mainstream media sites. I don't trust HBO because those numbers conflict with the Nielsens to such a strong degree. None of this makes any sense. Now, when we talk about any HBO show, there must be, again, the distinction made, like I mentioned earlier, between HBO the channel and HBO Max the streaming service. But because of TV finale, we can get some of the United States HBO cable channel viewership numbers for both of these shows. So House of the Dragon averaged 1.8 million views for its run on the US side of the HBO cable show. That is incredibly impressive. Its first episode got 2.1 million according to TV series finale. That is incredibly impressive. Its demo isn't amazing, with a demo of only 0.5 in its initial run, far superior to many of the CW shows out there that TV series finale reports on, but not necessarily as high as I would have expected for a show that was so successful as House of the Dragon was. Now let's compare the Last of Us's cable numbers in the United States to the ones we just saw for House of the Dragon. These numbers are substantially different. It averaged 0.8 million. That is an average of 1 million viewership less than House of the Dragon. Again, it doesn't make sense. These numbers I have to take as fact because of the evidence provided towards me. But these numbers conflict with each other, so I can't take them all as fact. So no reasonable deductions can be made from any of the evidence before me. At the end of the day, it might be merely a matter of HBO lying. Could possibly be the most reasonable outcome out of all of this. Again, I cannot say what is proof in this matter. I just would say, everyone out there, don't take these companies' words for their own success as fact and question everything, because none of these numbers make sense, and Last of Us does not deserve the overwhelming praise that it's gotten. Whether or not you like the show, I believe that most people who like the show can reasonably say it is not the greatest show of all time, like a lot of stands, mainstream, and access media sites has been heralding it as, and it does not deserve to be viewed more than House of the Dragon, not deserve to have headlines like this one from The Hollywood Reporter. It did not overwhelm House of the Dragon's numbers, even with the numbers that HBO themselves put out. Yes, it is a little bit higher with HBO's numbers, but that doesn't make sense with the online discourse, the viewership that I just provided. There's just so much contradiction here that anyone with a reasonable, logical brain should at least be able to say, hey, something funky is going on, and maybe The Last of Us isn't viewed more than House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon, I think, is a substantially better show. I didn't really like it that much better than The Last of Us overall, but it is generally a better show that was better received and had a much bigger franchise behind it and a much bigger name behind it and a much bigger fandom behind it. So it just makes logical sense for that one to be viewed more. And the overnight viewership numbers support that conclusion. But the headlines do not corroborate with that reasonable deduction of the evidence provided. But I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. What do you think of all these numbers? I'm incredibly confused by it, and that's what I have to say. None of it is taken as fact, but I would love to hear what you guys think. And if you guys have any other evidence that I'm not aware of or deductions that kind of fill in the gaps for me to a certain degree. But The Last of Us is not the abject success that the mainstream and access media sites will lend you to believe. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? Oh, I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.